Well, hello, everybody, and certainly welcome to today's session. It's great to have everybody on the call. Today's session, we're lucky enough to have presenters Tony Venning and Helen Smith with us, which I will get to their introductions shortly. My name's Tony Saker, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm CEO of Bentleys Network. I'm lucky enough to be hosting today's webinar, and I'll also be moderating the questions at the end of the presentation. It is, as I said, it's wonderful to have Tony and Helen with us, and I'll be introducing them in a moment. I would just say that I think the importance of today's topic really is paramount. I think you're in a really lucky position to be able to hear some expert advice and tips on cyber protection insurance and how it can protect your business from the ever-increasing threat of cyber attacks, as we've seen over the course of the past couple of years, with some high-profile companies, of course, being hit by cyber attacks. Next slide, if we could, please. Thanks. So look, from a housekeeping perspective, I just want to let you all know that we're using Microsoft Live Events technology today, of course, which we typically do for our webinars, and that'll give you the opportunity to ask questions throughout. If you would like to ask a question to any of the presenters or offer some feedback or comments along the way, please enter these details into the chat box through the presentation, and we'll hopefully get to address as many of the questions as possible at the end of the presentation. So I won't be interrupting the speakers per se. I'll do it at the conclusion. Please note as well, as always with these types of webinars that we do at Bentleys, the session will be recorded so that we can obviously distribute the recording following the event, of course. And obviously, in addition to any of this, if you do have any questions on any of the topics that have been covered today, please certainly also reach out to your Bentleys advisor, who can no doubt assist with any questions that may come up which you would like to have answered. So just talking about, for those of you that don't know Bentleys, although I imagine most of you do, for our guests today who are new to Bentleys, certainly welcome. Bentleys is an Australasian network of advisory, accounting and insurance firms. We do work with aspirational businesses and individuals to help them achieve their objectives and get to where they want to be. We offer our core services, of course, around audit, tax and accounting services, as well as a ever-expanding range of specializations that are catered to support the growing needs of modern businesses. So whether it's R&D, tax incentives, superannuation, wealth management, legal services, HR, ESG, these types of services are certainly ones which we have developed over the years, which we feel most accurately can cater to the business environment going forward. Obviously, as part of this, you'll work out that we also offer insurance advisory, a service that is increasingly important for the protection management and growth of our businesses going forward. Our insurance services are focused on giving business owners the right insurance cover to help those businesses protect their operations, protect their staffing, their workforce, their premises. And all this is obviously to strengthen our clients' ability to stay open, in that unfortunate situation if a disaster were to occur, of course. So traditionally, the type of cover that this has catered for has been around things like flood, fire and theft, of course. But as you all know, in modern business world, and as we've seen in many recent times, which I alluded to earlier, the insurance is also critical that it enables you to protect against any sort of cyber attack that you may experience, because without the right type of insurance cover there, you do risk losing everything you've worked so hard for. It's as though I would consider cyber insurance very much like a fire. It can burn down your premises metaphorically, and that's obviously a disaster. So with many insurance options available, you need to try and work out how you can make sure you are making that right choice. And there are many choices out there, but the team here at Bentleys are here to help. We take the time to understand what risks your businesses face, of course, And then we look to cater with that to structure the right insurance that you are properly covered. At Bentleys, we offer a bespoke service. We'll work with you to understand your businesses and what insurance coverage is required and what you don't need as well, so that you're not wasting money, of course. And due to our negotiating strength and the key relationships that we've built over the years, we can probably negotiate a far better price on your behalf. So if you would like to discuss these options with anyone at Bentleys, please reach out to our appropriate advisor and we'll take care of you. The last component for me to talk about before I hand over to our presenters today is to introduce them formally. So firstly, Tony Venning is a Director of General Insurance within Bentleys Insure. He's had over 25 years experience in the insurance industry, and he's obviously in that time developed a very deep understanding of the market, particularly in the areas of professional indemnity, directors and officers liability, and cyber insurance. Throughout Tony's career, he's provided insurance brokering services to a wide range of clients across the country, including some of Australia's largest private and ASX-listed companies, as well as multinational corporations. Tony's actively involved in the insurance industry and regularly speaks at conferences and events, as he's doing today, although it's our own, sharing his knowledge and insights with others within the industry. Tony's dedication to his clients and his deep understanding of the insurance market makes him an asset to Bentleys Insure Queensland and the wider insurance industry, of course. Our second presenter today is Helen Smith. Helen's a Senior Account Manager at Bentleys Insurance Services. She has a strong technical and global market knowledge, and Helen has provided insurance brokering services for Australia's largest private and ASX-listed companies as well, in addition to many multinational corporations. Helen specialises in professional liability brokerage and has considerable experience arranging insurance solutions for large corporations, professional firms, group associations, and small to medium business enterprises. Her specialisations include information technology and cyber and management liability, which is places her in a very unique position to present to us today. I hope you all really enjoyed today's presentation. Thank you for joining. Please remember to type in any questions that you have during the chat panel. And that's the last you'll hear from me until the end of the session. Over to you, Tony Venning.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate the intro and quite well said. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. So as part of the agenda today, what we want to do is to actually give you some insight into how your business can best manage against what is an ever-increasing cyber risk issue for businesses, as Tony just alluded to, and we do refer to it like a digital fire. So how we want to help you understand how you can best protect your business is to give you a clearer view of what that looks like. So today we're going to go through an overview of what the cyber risk landscape looks like, how you can deal with that with some cyber risk management and what that looks like, how insurance can complement that together with the incident response services that cyber insurance provides, as well as coverage. Look at some of the threat analysis by industry type, some claimed examples, and generally how we can help you manage your cyber risk from a Bentleys insurance perspective. So we've got a lot to get through, so I think we'll just get straight into the next slide. So if we look at cyber risk, it's definitely making the headlines. So Medibank, Optus, etc., has certainly put it fair square in all business owners, and I think it's universally agreed as the number one threat to businesses, and that whether it be business owners, board directors, even ASIC have come out and basically put everybody on notice that the company directors will face scrutiny in the event that they haven't complied with their obligations under the Privacy Act. So it's a big issue for us all to deal with. And to put some context around where cyber risk is sitting at the moment, there's some really interesting statistics that the Actuaries Institute published recently. And if you just look at those three first bullet points that you can see now, they're quite staggering. So cybercrime is reported every 8 minutes in Australia, and the total economic losses that we see in the last financial year, and this is for Australia, was $33 billion. And globally in 2021, there was 623 million ransomware attacks. So that just gives some scale to the issue that we're dealing with. And I think, importantly as well, what was noted in that report by the Actuaries Institute was that SMEs are now firmly in the target of cyber criminals. And the reason for that is because the cybersecurity and defences that SMEs have in place are typically less. And that can be seen by some of the stats that were produced in that report, such as 50% of SME businesses spend less than $500 a year on cybersecurity. And 50% of SME businesses were assessed as having poor cybersecurity practices. And what that says is that cyber criminals just see it as an easier target, but also there's less repercussions if they do choose to hit those organisations. So our message here is it's not a matter of if you get if your business suffers a cyber attack, it's really when, and it's about being prepared for that. And so what we want to do now is just talk about some of the fundamentals of cyber risk management. So if we just go to the next slide, when we look at protecting your business from a cyber threat, really what we want to talk about is the philosophical view that a business owner should take, and that is that prevention is better than a cure. So yes, insurance is important, but ultimately your first line of defence must be a strong and robust cyber security and risk management plan. So insurance is an essential part of that, but that deals with the issue once it's happened. And what we want to talk about in the coming slides is really what your business should be doing to prepare or prevent an attack actually happening. And there are some key fundamentals which all businesses should be doing, and we want to talk you through that. But importantly, if you want to get cyber insurance, and in order to get affordable cyber insurance and comprehensive cover, you need to demonstrate to insurers that you have a strong cyber risk management plan in place. If you're unable to do that, you're very unlikely to get cover, and if you do, it'll be very restrictive. So it's really important from that insurance buying perspective as well. We can just go to the next slide. So what we want to give you an idea of what good cyber risk management looks like for an SME business. So really what it starts with is a strong information security policy. And what that document looks like and what it should do is really set out the rules, the policies and the procedures for how your business treats and the expectations it has around IT security and also how it manages its data. It's a really important policy document to set the culture within your organisation. The other one is an incident response plan. So some of you may be more aware with things like business continuity plans or disaster recovery plans. It's very similar to that, but specific to a cyber attack scenario where it's a step-by-step plan, exactly how your organisation will respond to a cyber attack. So what are the steps, when are they taken, and importantly, who takes it? And so it's a really important document in terms of making sure that your organisation mitigates what happens in the event of a cyber attack. If we look at some of the basic cyber risk hygienes that we want to see in a business, and certainly insurers will want to see when we talk to them about purchasing cyber insurance, we talk about things like automatic software and application patching. So that's things like your Microsoft Windows operating system or iOS, making sure that you've got automatic updates, because there are viruses being deployed day in, day out that Microsoft and Apple are continually releasing updates in order to deal with those threats as they become apparent. And if you're doing those automatic software and application patching, then your virus and anti-malware solution will be up to date, which is really important in terms of having a defense mechanism. The other one is regular backups. Okay, so really what we're going to be able to demonstrate is that you've got offline disconnected backups from your main system that in the event of a cyber attack, we can then spin up another version of your system to get you back up and running as soon as possible. So that's a really important one, that you've got those regular data backups offline from your main system. The other one, which insurers are now expecting. So this has been a big shift in the last, let's say, 18 months, where insurers are now insisting that organisations have multi-factor authentication for system access. And if we look at what that looks like, I mean, just think of your banking. When you go on, you'll have a text sent to your phone in order to access it, in terms of a secondary way that you're actually authenticating yourself. And it's really important that your system has that in terms of accessing your IT network. The other one is utilisation of a commercial grade password manager. And what we're really getting at here is the days of sticky notes with passwords on them, or a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet with just a whole heap of your passwords, just doesn't cut it. So you really need to utilise commercial grade encrypted password managers, and not only store your passwords, but also ensure that they're changed frequently. Now, the other really important point about cyber risk management is making sure that your IT service provider is the services provider done so under a management agreement which stipulate the minimum security levels that they should be providing. So for most SME business owners, they will have an outsourced IT provider. So it's really important to ensure that's governed appropriately by a written agreement which stipulates the expectations on that IT provider. If we can just go to the next slide, what's really useful for business owners is the Australian Cyber Security Centre website. Now, this is a government agency that leads the Australian government's efforts to improve cybersecurity, and it's a fantastic resource for business. So it's free. One of the best publications, and it's been out for a long time, is the Australian Cyber Security Centre Essential 8. And what it is basically level 1 recommendation in terms of what a business should have in terms of its cyber risk management. And you can go onto the ACSC website, and it has a fantastic material, especially if you're talking to your IT provider, about what you should be having in your business as a minimum level of cyber security protection. In terms of the first 4 that you see, application control, patch applications, configure Microsoft Office macro settings, and user application hardening. A couple of years ago, ACSC put out some statistics to say that if those 4 were implemented in all businesses, then 85% of cyber attacks would have been avoided. So it's really important to be across this. What I'd suggest is that either your IT personnel or provider, make sure that they'll be familiar with them, but make sure your organisation has these embedded as part of your cyber risk management. So if we can just go to the next slide now. So now that we've dealt with risk management, and hopefully you've got an idea of really what we'd be expecting to see, and certainly what insurers would be expecting to see when we approach them, we just want to start to introduce cyber insurance as a product to you. Now, hopefully, I say hopefully, most of you have some form of cyber insurance in place at the moment. But we're going to assume for this that this is the first time you've heard about it, and take you through on a step-by-step basis of what it is and what it covers. So it's an emerging product that really first started in the late 90s and started to take more uptake in the 2000s. But what we're seeing now is that it's just basic hygiene. So we expect every business to have it, because every business has an exposure to it. Even if you're a trade, you'll have some digital banking, your payroll. Everybody is touched by a digital network somewhere. So it's really important for all businesses to have cyber insurance. An important note to make, though, when you're looking at it and when you're speaking to an advisor about designing the cover, is that because it's an emerging product, there are still significant differences from insurer to insurer. So if we look at things like property and motor vehicle insurance, they're well-established products over many years where the coverage offered from one insurer to the next will be similar, whereas cyber insurance as an emerging product is still quite immature. So therefore, we're still seeing significant difference in cover from insurer to insurer, which means the selection of insurer for your business is paramount to suit your circumstances. In saying that, a cyber insurance policy will generally take 3 component parts of its structure. And one is the cover that is provided, which is generally divided into losses that you suffer. So things like business interruption that is a loss to your business. It'll be costs associated with responding to an attack, and we'll get into some of those services later. And then third-party losses. So where you suffer a legal liability claim for breaching someone's right to privacy. The incident response services are key. So they actually are the ones that are most used when there's a cyber attack, and it brings in the specialists that actually help your business respond to a cyber attack. And there's the obviously exclusions and conditions. And we're just going to touch on some of the key ones to be aware of, particularly as it's an emerging product for your business. So we're just going to dive deeper into that now. So if we can go to the next slide. So what can be covered under a cyber insurance policy? Well, it's a broad policy. It extends to business interruptions, so loss of revenue following attacks, cyber extortion, ransomware, which has been hitting the headlines with things like Medibank and Optus, social engineering and cyber fraud, particularly where there's banking fraud or transfer of funds fraud, your cyber incident response costs, your regulatory exposure, which is ever increasing following the recent high-profile cases with Medibank and Optus, fines and penalties, which are now touching on $50 million, and we'll get into some of that later, and really where business should be paying close attention to their obligations, and then data breach and cyber liability. So just for the next couple of slides, stay with us because we're going to go deep, but hopefully you can get some idea of really what the covers are that are under a cyber insurance policy. So under business interruption, it's loss of revenue suffered as a result of attack. So think you walk in, your systems are down, you can't trade. Now, for some businesses, that's a reality. So it's your loss of revenue associated with that attack, with that cyber attack. The key thing at the moment that we see is that the definition of loss of revenue or net profit will vary from insurer to insurer. And that's what I touched on earlier about the importance of selecting the right cover for your business in terms of your needs. The big one here with business interruption as well is the indemnity period. So some insurers will only offer you cover for business interruption as long as the cyber attack it keeps your system offline. Some offer 30 days, some stretch out to 365 days. Obviously, there can be a price difference, but it's important to select the right coverage for you. But this is a really important part of cyber insurance. Next slide. So cyber extortion and ransom is really where we're seeing the most high-profile cases at the moment. And in effect, it gives you that cover for, yes, the payment. We're legally permitted, and at this stage it is, and obviously that's up for debate at the moment. We're legally permitted the payment of demand in exchange for either data or access to your network. And there has been some high-profile cases, particularly in America, where large ransom payments were made because it was seen as a more cost-effective way to get back online as opposed to build it up from scratch. Now, part of this benefit is that it actually gives you access to specialist consultants and advisors to step you through the process. And part of that is an assessment as to whether the ransom needs to be paid or whether you have the ability to actually recover from the attack without paying the demand. And so bringing those experts in is a key part of the benefit of a cyber insurance policy, as well as the payment itself. Next slide. Social engineering and cyber fraud. Again, one of the favoured tools of cyber criminals. So in effect, it'll cover you for theft of funds as a result of deception of your employees by a third party or cyber criminal. The deception has to be done following an intentional act by a third party to if you like, mislead or deceive an employee or a business owner, someone who has access to funds transfer, and the method of communication or intrusion happens on your network. So if you put this in some practical terms, probably one of the most common one that we see and we've dealt with a number of times through various cyber claims is the Microsoft Outlook being compromised. So someone gets in, finds a supplier invoice, changes the email slightly and sends you or an employee a request to change bank account details. And because of the intrusion they had on your Outlook, they can make it look very much like the supplier. And as a result, they've deceived the employee into changing, say, supplier's details on your digital bank account. And then if all future payments go out fraudulently to a third-party bank account. The other one that we commonly see is where a CEO or CFO or someone in authority is holidaying in, say, a Fiji or something like that. They're posting all of their intimate details on Facebook, and the cyber criminals scraping that information. And as they scrape that information, they send an email back to, say, the CFO at the office saying, hey, Fiji's great. You know, Tommy and Lily are enjoying their swimming, but I need you to make this urgent funds transfer. So they've used information available on social media to deceive somebody in your business to make a fraudulent funds transfer. So generally the cover is optional with most insurers, and it is limited to a maximum of $250,000. You can go to the next slide. So if you look at the incident response services, and this is one of the most, I think it's underrated in terms of what the benefit available is under these services. It's the first response, if you like, when you first become aware of a cyber attack. In fact, we had a claim come in Monday, and you know it's like a war room scenario where you basically get the insurer's panel of expert advisors on your team to best respond to what is a major threat. And I often say to our clients, just think about it. What would you do if you walked in and your screens went blank and there was a message saying that you've been hacked and they expected a ransom? You know, but what's your first response to that? And this is where this comes in. So it's a comprehensive range of services ranging from legal representation, IT forensics, public relations, crisis response, and identity theft monitoring. And depending on the insurer, they can be provided either in-house or outsourced. So let's just have a look at these in closer detail. If we go to the next slide, legal representation is really important. So first of all, it gives you your legal advice around your liabilities and how you should be responding from a legal sense. And it's done under privilege. So you'll sign a letter of engagement with the relevant law firm to ensure confidential information is exchanged and is done so under privilege. It also helps in terms of the defence costs that may arise in terms of defending any third-party claims resulting from a data breach. But importantly is that the Privacy Act and the increased obligations under the Privacy Act, they'll help you navigate those waters in terms of what you have to notify and what your response needs to be in terms of the ever-increasing regulatory obligations under the Privacy Act, as well as any investigations that may result in a fine or penalty. We can just go to the next slide. So the IT forensics, so these are the experts that come in day one to actually be the first responders to a cyber attack. So what they're doing is first of all, understanding the intrusion point, where it's happened, what the likely threat is, are they still in your system? And that's one of the big things, is that you may think that, yes, I've been attacked, but it's clear. Well, the first thing that the IT forensic people do is to do a real sweep of your whole system to ensure that is the case and secure the IT infrastructure and then make a credible threat assessment. and then mitigate the ongoing impact on your business to ensure that we can get the systems back up and running as quickly as possible to mitigate the ongoing loss. But the key thing is to ensure that the threat no longer exists in terms of being in your system across the myriad of servers and applications that you run. So that's a key part of their job, and the one that we see really relied on in those first 72 hours in terms of mitigating and getting your business back up and running. Next slide. And the other one, of course, to think about is the public relations fallout, and that's usually, in terms of the directors, that's their real concern is what are we going to tell clients? What are we going to tell our staff? What are we going to tell our team about what's happened, and how do we message that appropriately? And you've got this on call, some of the leading public relations experts who have experience in dealing with this in terms of managing your reputational exposure. So this is critically important at that early stage in terms of formulating a detailed response and pathway in terms of how your business is going to navigate the various stakeholders in your business and how you communicate with them. Next slide. So part of the obligations you're going to have if you actually do have a data breach will actually be identity theft monitoring. And what that comes from is where you've had a data breach, you've identified that, well, then you have an obligation to ensure that those persons or entities affected by a cyber attack are monitored to ensure that their identities haven't been compromised. So this comes again as part of the normal service offering by an insurer. Generally, it'll extend a period up to 2 months, but ultimately it can be extended if it does mitigate the ongoing exposure and liability of your business following a cyber attack. So I think you can see that these incident response services are extensive and are multifaceted to ensure that your business is properly protected and the loss is mitigated following a cyber attack. Next slide. We talked a bit through this about the regulatory exposure, and following the recent high-profile breaches, the government was heavily pressured to increase the penalties under the Privacy Act and give the Privacy Commissioner enhanced powers to deal with organisations that had repeated or serious offences and weren't compliant with the Privacy Act. And you can see the previous penalty prior to the recent amendment to the Act was $2.2 million for companies. Well, that's been increased massively to the greater of $50 million, 3 times the value of the benefits obtained, or 30% of the corporation's turnover. And for individuals, it's jumped from 440 to 2.5 million. So the scale of powers now to the Privacy Commission under the Act are extensive, and businesses really need to ensure they've got appropriate protection in place. One, just to deal with the obligations, respond to any cyber attack in terms of what you should be doing, but also the potential fines and penalties that can come from that. Next slide. So we're actually doing another webinar which will specifically address privacy compliance, and that's on the 31st of May. We're doing that. It's a data bench hosting that together with Bentleys and Watton and Kearney. So certainly strongly recommend you tune into this. It'll give you a bit more detail on the specific issue and how you can help prepare your business in terms of its obligations and how you should be responding. So tune into that on the 31st of May. Next slide. Obviously, a big part of cyber insurance is data breach liability. So it's coverage for those legal liability claims against compensation of a data breach following a cyber event. But importantly, it provides protection both for claims arising from individuals or entities for their right to privacy being breached through unauthorized access to your network. It can also extend to liabilities arising from malware or other compromising viruses or applications being deployed to other third-party systems. So it's a really important part. It also includes legal defence costs. So critical part of your cyber protection in terms of protecting against those third-party liability claims. I think following Medibank and Optus, we're going to see more and more where there's potential for class action. Certainly in America, there's now a history of that. Australia hasn't been as exposed, but I think, again, it's a matter of when, not if, that class action litigation starts to take place. Next slide. Okay, so some of the key exclusions. Obviously, with any policy, there's going to be key exclusions and conditions. So we're not proposing we're going to run through all the exclusions and conditions of a cyber policy. What we want to do is just take you through some of those key ones that I think emerge because of the differing levels of cover from one insurer to the next. And what we see is some insurers, for example, web hosting activity. So if you're involved in information technology or the provision of that, or software as a service, and as part of that you're providing web hosting, we see some insurers having a blanket exclusion on that. So you really want to be aware of that. And if that is the case, you've got to make sure that it doesn't affect your business. The other one is state-backed attack exclusion. So Lloyd's have recently pushed this out, where if it's deemed that a terrorist organisation is sponsored by a state actor has been the initiator of a cyber attack, there are exclusions that can exist there. The other one is particularly if your cyber security isn't up to scratch, then you'll sometimes be offered a cyber quotation, but it will exclude ransomware. It's really important to be across that and to be aware of that if that is the case. And the other one that we see is that some insurers in the market actually do exclude financial crime and social engineering and fraud, and that's because they have a view that it should be covered elsewhere under what we call a management liability policy, where there's actually crime coverage. So depending on the insurer that you have, you've got to make sure that your cyber insurance is dovetailing in with other products to ensure that there's seamless cover. What you don't want to do is have the insurance with, say, a cyber insurer that excludes social engineering or financial crime, and your prime insurer through another policy doesn't cover it either. So it's really important to ensure that your cyber insurance is designed in conjunction with your other policies. So I hope you managed to stay with me there. We went fairly deep, and but I think it's all very useful and hopefully illustrates the breadth of cover that is available under a cyber insurance. Not only the cover, but the services provided by insurers in helping you respond to a cyber attack. Now I'm going to throw to Helen, who's going to take you through some real practical examples, and I think give it some colour in terms of cyber coverage and how it responds. So Helen, over to you.
Oh, thanks so much, Tony. So yeah, look, I'm going to run through some of the emerging trends in cyber insurance, including threats by attack type, threats by industry segment, and then the types of information that is often stolen in these cyber attacks. So for those of you who like graphs and statistics, you're in for a bit of a treat. A bit of colour, as Tony said. And then after that, I'm going to go through some claims examples just to finish off. So the first graph here, this is threats by attack type. So as you can see, business email compromise and hacker damage still by far continues to be the most common form of attack. It's usually for the purpose of payment fraud and intel gathering. And then phishing emails, they're still the biggest threat as well. And that's why, as Tony mentioned, having a really robust cyber security process in place, it's really essential for your business. Educating your employees, not to click on those suspicious emails that we all receive. And then look, at the end of the day, insurance, it is your last line of defence for when those processes break down. And so then you can see that's followed by ransomware at 23%, and privacy breach, which, as Tony mentioned earlier, those penalties under the Privacy Act, they have recently increased really dramatically. And then followed then by social engineering and business interruption. So, and I do have claims examples for each of these types of threat. So just the next slide, thanks, Louise. So this one shows us threats by industry segment, and you can see that blue piece of pipe there has that medical services. It's one of the most commonly attacked areas of the industry. And as you can imagine, they do hold some extremely, personal and sensitive information that you really don't want getting out there in the cyber world. And I do have some claims examples of medical centres a little bit later on. And then I guess followed then by consultants, retailing, wholesaling, manufacturing, and then we've still got financial services. They're featuring in the top 5 always. So accountants, real estate agents, that sort of thing. A lot of financial information being held by these businesses that making them a real target for cyber criminals. And then interestingly, all those other areas of industry, they're all targeted by cyber criminals. And so I guess the main takeout here is that it doesn't really matter what industry you're in, you really are a potential target for a cyber attack. Okay. Just next one. So then finally, we've got the types of information that's being stolen. So the number one item there is contact information. It's, at a massive 42%. And, we mentioned earlier that, your cyber policy, it does include cover for notification costs and ongoing legal advice when you do discover a breach. And then we've got financial details, 20%. And then identity information, that's also pretty high there. And as Tony mentioned earlier, cyber insurance, insurers, they'll appoint a third party provider to engage in identity theft and credit monitoring services. So if that sort of information has been stolen. And then we've got health information, also very sensitive, clearly. And then the last one there, tax file numbers at 7%. Okay, all right, thanks, Louise. Next slide. So just I've got some claims examples here. So this one is a retail store that operated an e-commerce website which became infected with malicious code. The website showed black screens to its customers and their staff were unable to access any orders in the system. So the insured cyber policy covered them for the removal of the malware and restoration of the website by their IT forensics. The impact of the lost revenue, increased costs caused by the attack was also covered under the business interruption section of the policy. Okay. So the next one, so ransomware with a law firm. So a law firm received a cyber extortion threat and ransomware attack on their computer network. All their services were encrypted and these systems provided core business functionality. Unfortunately, they're only backup copies, which were also part of the network. They were also encrypted, so there was no access to their backups either. So with no way to crypt this variant of ransomware, the decision was made by the underwriters for a payment of the ransom of 0.6 Bitcoin, which equated to approximately 5,300 Australian dollars. So after a delay, it was then discovered that the decryption key that they'd been provided by the cyber criminals, it didn't even work. And so they needed to continue to manually rebuild the network and focus on restoring the basic functions as a matter of priority. So in this case, the first party costs and expenses were covered. So the cost of the ransomware and rebuilding the system was covered under the policy, and also the loss of business income was covered by the insurance policy. So next one, so this one, privacy error at a medical practice. I mentioned earlier that medical centres are targeted and one of the most targeted areas of industry. So here an employee of a medical practice had sent an administrative email to its patients advising of an altered trading hours over the Christmas period. The employee inadvertently attached an Excel spreadsheet to the email that provided personal information of some of the patients. And the spreadsheet included patients' names, address, Medicare number, and a short description of their last visit. So some pretty sensitive information that you really don't want anybody getting a hold of. So, I mean, this really was, it was just a human error, and, there's some, you really can't avoid that. It's going to happen, and it happens to everybody. So the cover was provided for the notification of the costs, for notification costs, which included the cost of notifying the individuals who were impacted, and then also notifying the Office of Australian Information Commissioner. And then also the policy, also as I mentioned earlier, the identity theft response cost to the individuals is also covered under the policy. Next one. So, so this one, so another medical centre, so we're really picking on medical centres here, received a communication from a fraudster impersonating the ATO. I think we've all had something like that come across, whether that a phone call or email. The fraudster was impersonating the ATO, requiring urgent payment of outstanding taxes, and the medical centre thought it was real. They paid the outstanding taxes in good faith, believing it was genuine. In this event, cover was provided under the social engineering section of the policy, and the lost funds were covered, including investigation costs as to how it happened. So social engineering, this is often a sublimited area of the policy. So it usually can be, whether it's 25,000 or 50 or 100,000. It certainly doesn't. Not many policies, or I don't think there's any policies that will give you the full limit for social engineering. And it also can be an optional cover, so you don't necessarily have it automatically included as a part of your policy. Next one. So this one, social engineering, again, for a construction company. So this company received invoices from an email address purporting to be from a supplier. The insured raised and processed the payment for the invoices, and then the real supplier followed up a few days later with a phone call asking for the funds. And then upon investigation, it was identified that the invoices were fraudulent or contained fraudulent bank details. So this one, could have been avoided with a phone call to the supplier, and that's just one of the processes that we keep pushing. You have the good processes in place so that these types of claims can be avoided. So in this case, an IT forensic firm investigated and identified that the network had been infiltrated. And then indemnity was provided under the social engineering component of the policy. And so also network security event insuring clauses and for the fraudulent transfer and remediation costs as well. Next one. So this one's contingent business interruption. Also, this is often an optional cover that you can take out. It's not always automatically included in every policy. So in this case, an external supplier of a bedding manufacturer suffered a malware attack. So their manufacturing plant stopped for 3 weeks while the engineers and IT experts tried to restore the systems. So as a result of the supplier's cyber event, our insured could not source the critical components for manufacturing and operations, and so their business was interrupted. And so the policy covered the insured for contingent business interruption, and that's where the insured paid the bedding manufacturer's impact on the business costs arising from an outage of the external supplier's business. Next one. So this is tangible property for a property manager. So in this case, a property manager's server suffered heat damage, so physical damage to the server that happened during a cyber attack, and it was no longer suitable for use. So in this case, tangible property was coverage was provided for the repair and the replacement of the damaged equipment. And again, tangible property, it can be an optional cover. It's not always automatically included with the policy, and it also can be sublimited. So, again, there'll be a limit under the policy, whether it's 10,000, 25,000, it depends on the policy. And so it's important, obviously, to, understand what actually is in your cyber policy, what is and isn't included. Okay. I think that's it.
Great.
For claims examples. Yeah, so that's it for me. So thanks, Tony. Back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Helen. And thank you very much to Tony earlier as well. Thank you to you both. That was, I guess in many ways fascinating, but also equally scary. I mean, some of the things that, before I jump to the questions, we do have a couple of questions that have come through. But gosh, total economic losses of 33 billion. And I noted 623 million ransomware attacks in 2021. So I think, Tony, you mentioned it's not a case of not if, but when. And I think that's really right. It's almost surprising if you haven't been attacked in a way. I hate to say it that way, but that is surprising, based off those statistics. And I think for those on the call to give an example or an understanding of it as well, and to make sure that your own policy or your cyber posture, I believe is the term, that those essential 8 guidelines and recommendations are quite important to jump to. And I think Helen's examples there really did speak to the fact that, you know, there are so many different ways you can be attacked, and your policies do really need to be aware of all these elements and cognizant of it, which is why it's almost impossible as just a regular business owner to be able to understand all of this. So, you know, I would really encourage you to reach out to your Bentleys colleagues, Bentleys contacts, should I say, there, who can assist you in this space. Now, on the questions, if I can, firstly, there was a question just before I launch into a couple that have come through. There's one for Helen and it looks like one for Tony as well. But there was a question around the fact that around whether the slides were going to be distributed. Yes, they will. I think Joe did answer that on the chat, but in case people saw it and didn't see the response yet, the slide decks will certainly be available. So now if I can just jump to the questions. Firstly, Helen, the first one looks like it's for you. This says, my business has already recently experienced a cyber attack and we did not have cyber insurance. That's a good one. Will it be difficult to get an insurer to cover us for future cyber losses?
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So, I mean, always the cyber insurers, they will take your claims experience into account when they're considering a risk. But it's often the businesses who have already previously experienced some sort of cyber event or cyber attack. They're the ones who are the most prepared for the same sort of thing to happen again. So, you know, if they've had to rebuild their systems, if they've had to, you know, put all the right processes in place, they're generally better equipped to deal with, you know, future cyber events. And yeah, often the insurers, you know, will definitely take that into account. I had a really similar incident happen. A client who, funnily enough, another medical centre, they had a cyber attack and they didn't have cyber insurance. It was before I was their broker, by the way. And so they had to rebuild their whole system. They had to notify, and you know, the costs in doing that, it was in excess of $80,000. It was a massive undertaking for not that big of a business. You know, it wasn't a huge medical centre, so it's a big cost to try and come up with. And so after that happened, they came to me and they did ask me to get them some cyber cover, and it really wasn't difficult at all. You know, the insurers were, you know, they do understand that, you know, systems have been rebuilt, they had all the right processes in place, they were able to demonstrate that. And yeah, we were able to get them a policy in place. A little late, but you know, if anything happens in future, they've got the cover that they need.
Okay, no, that's good. Thanks, Helen. I guess the lesson there is, well, obviously it's better to have insurance at you know, at the start before this happens, because it is a matter of not if but when. But I suppose if you have been unlucky enough, A, to be attacked, and B, did not have insurance, if you've been fortuitous enough to have a robust enough business in place to bat through that attack and continue your business, you know, for heaven's sake, go get some insurance, because the next time around it might not be so easy to unwind or to get out of, and it could be more, as we've seen, a potential crippling of the business rather than anything else. And I thank you for that answer. Tony, the next one is for you. What's this? How much cyber insurance? I'm not sure how easy this will be to answer. How much cyber insurance should a small business be buying?
Thanks, Tony. Well, that's a question we often get asked in a client review meeting when they're first considering cyber insurance. And look, I think the initial answer to that is just make sure you're buying something. And the reason I say that is because of the access to those incident response services. Because whether you're buying a $500,000 limit, $1 million limit, or a $5 million limit, you're still getting access to those incident response services. So the main message to clients, less and less these days, because more and more are having it, is if you don't have it, just take the lowest limit possible just to get access to those in the first instance. Then start to look at how viable it is for your business to afford additional sum insured. Now, generally what we'll say is buy as much as you can afford, because I think if you look at the examples we gave, Helen gave some of those claims examples. We talked through incident response costs, we talked through business interruption, cyber extortion, ransomware, social engineering, fraud, etc. You quickly burn through limits. So when we first deal with a claim that's first reported, sometimes we'll in the first week, costs will go through $250,000 just engaging lawyers, IT forensics, public relations consultants. So what we tend to say is buy something, then consider options for 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, and then make an informed decision about what your business can afford. Generally in Australia, the limits are coming down because it obviously with the increased threat, insurers aren't offering the limit they used to. So you normally get options of 1, 2 and 5 million, but be aware of this. When you buy a cyber insurance limit, it's what we call an aggregate limit. So once you exhaust that limit, if you buy $1 million limit, once you exhaust that limit, so you've incurred all your legal costs, your business interruption, any legal liability, once you hit $1 million, that's it. There's no more cover. So that's why we say buy something, then take the options to make an informed decision to buy as much as you can afford.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's well answered, because I did think the question was quite an open-ended one, but I think that's really good advice for firms out there. Get something. If you don't already, for heaven's sake, buy something. Then evaluate what you've got, because you can always, as we all know, in different forms of insurance or different forms of lending, different forms of foreign exchange cover, interest rate cover, all these policies or insurance approaches are, they're not set in stone. So you can go in, you can change it, you can make it more
Correct.
specific and bespoke to your business. So I think getting some in place, great advice. Get that. Clearly, you and Helen have clearly illustrated the reason for that and the critical nature of it. But then as well, you can adjust it so that it can become more bespoke to your individual business. So I think that's very important for people on the call to have heard. So. Yeah. Look, I don't have any other questions on the chat, and let me just see if anything else has come through. No, nothing else has. Oh no, wait. There is actually. Where a client, I'm not sure which one of you will be answering this. Where a client sells a personal property to a customer who has paid the price to a fraudster, not client. The client does not have the vehicle and the customer is out of pocket. Would cyber insurance have been helpful in these circumstances to either the seller or the buyer? Do you need me to repeat that question?
Probably. That had a few connotations to it.
Okay, it's just in the chat, so let me read it again to you both. Where a client sells a personal property asset to a customer who has paid the price to a fraudster, that is not the client. So I guess they've paid funds away. Yeah. Yeah,
I understand. At the end of the day, as a principal insured, so as the holder of the cyber insurance, you have to have suffered a loss. So if your customer suffers a loss because they paid it to a fraudster, then they need to have their own protection in place. What's important, though, is that if any of those customers' details are compromised as a result of your system or network, then you need to make sure that you have that cyber insurance in regards to legal liability should they end up trying to recover from you for their data being breached, which may have resulted in that type of attack. I hope that answers that question. I think that's what that question's getting at.
No, I think you're right. No, and thank you for that, Tony. The last one here that I can see is, provided an SME has a robust cyber security plan, what can SME customers expect to pay approximately for premium coverage and low coverage? So I don't know, $1 million worth of coverage if they've got a decent cyber security plan in place. What's that going to cost in dollars? Do either of you roughly know, or is it too difficult to say?
I would say the biggest factor will depend on turnover. So and the thing with SME, when you look at the definition of SME, it can range from sort of 20 million to 100 million in terms of turnover. But let's just say, as a guide, you're looking for $1 million coverage and your turnover is, say, under 5 mil, and you're a retail business, let's say, then you're certainly comfortably, looking under sort of $5,000 in premium. In fact, you're probably more in the region of sort of 2. But all the factors need to be taken into consideration in terms of what type of security you have, the industry, the type of data you have, etc. But this give you some flavour on it. It's not onerous. So if you're going to buy $1 million of coverage and your turnover was sort of under 10 million, you're not looking at like a $10,000-$20,000 premium or anything like that. What I would say is, Helen and I could assist in terms of quickly evaluating what the business needs are, its risk, approach that some cyber insurers to give a firm indication of what it will cost. It's a very quick turnaround, and we'd be certainly happy to assist in doing that.
Great. No, thanks, Tony. There is one more, and Tony, you're in the spotlight here. So it said, it says in the initial slides, Tony highlighted the main mechanisms of breaches. Thankfully, it's you, Tony, not me. In a subsequent slide, these mechanisms were listed as exemptions to cover. To what extent are these mechanisms covered? And then further to that, there is a requirement to have a robust, oops, it's just gone off the screen actually. Sorry, let me just, I've got it here as well. Sorry, let me start that again, Tony. In the initial slides, Tony highlighted the main mechanisms of breaches. In a subsequent slide, these mechanisms were listed as exemptions to cover. To what extent are these mechanisms covered? And then further to that, there is a requirement to have a robust cybersecurity measures in place to ensure you're covered. Is this proportional to the size of the business? Example, is an SME required to have an enterprise level protection?
Yep, that's a really good questions. So
Yeah.
if we start with the initial one, if we talk about, say, ransomware, which is seen as a major method of attack, and what we did say in the key exclusions was it can be excluded. And what I touched on when we were going through the cyber risk management is that if you can't demonstrate it, then you're unlikely to get cover. But if you do, there will be significant restrictions placed on it. And an example of that is where a cyber insurer may offer you cover, but will exclude ransomware because you haven't been able to demonstrate appropriate cyber risk management. So that's where we get to the point where the better risk management you have, the better prepared you are in terms of preventing an attack, but also the better cover we can obtain on the back end. And what should be done is it's always made very clear in terms of what's covered, and most importantly, what isn't. So it's a really good point in terms of picking that up, and it further illustrates why you need that cyber risk management. In terms of an SME, absolutely right in terms of saying if you're a $2 million turnover business, for example, you're not expected to have enterprise grade risk management. For example, that ACSC Essential 8, the majority, unfortunately, of large companies, say in excess of 100 mil turnover, don't have that. Right. So we're talking about what is best practice, but what should be done. I mean, an IT provider should be able to deliver that essential 8, but quite often it does mean that access or to the system can be made a bit more difficult. It takes longer because you've got more security controls in place, and a lot of organisations, particularly executives, push against it. But more and more we're seeing as a non-negotiable. So no, there is scale, if you like, for what's expected from that level of business, and we'll certainly help clients step through that around what's expected based on where your business sits.
Great. No, thank you for that, Tony. That was quite a long question, so I appreciate that. Look, that brings us to the, there are no further questions in the chat or on the platform here. So firstly, I'd like to thank Tony and Helen for putting the work in to give these presentations. This is certainly an extremely important topic. I couldn't stress it any more for businesses to really get their heads around. And as Tony points out, just in his last answer there, it's not just SMEs that maybe aren't insured. There are large businesses that don't really understand this. So and therein lies substantial risks for those firms, and how that then comes about if you're a director in those companies, for example. You should be asking these questions if you're on a board of if your own company has the insurance and you're comfortable with that, but you happen to be on another board. I'd be asking these questions because your fiduciary duty as a director is to ask those types of questions. So I'd thank all the people as well for dialing in, all the participants, and also those joining in and listening to Helen and Tony present. Thank you very much for your time. The link will be sent around as well to the recordings. So if you've missed anything or you'd like to review something that was said or some of the slides, you'll have the opportunity to do that as well. Again, if you have any questions on this, please contact your Bentleys advisor directly for support. If they're not specialists in this field, they can certainly point you to specialists such as Tony or Helen within the Bentleys group that can certainly assist you. We'd be very pleased to obviously help you. Plus, also we really are passionate about making sure that all our clients are well protected from a cyber insurance perspective. So thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and well, all the very best, and I look forward to seeing you next time in one of our upcoming webinars. Thanks.